10 years ago today, a tornado outbreak ravaged communities in Kentucky, West Virginia, and Ohio, killing dozens of people and injuring hundreds.
And tonight, we're looking at the devastation faced by those communities and their stories of resilience over the past decade. But it hasn't been easy, but they've persevered together. Before we visit them today, let's take a look back at March 2nd, 2012, a day that will never be forgotten.
Since we're under a tornado watch across the area, I would expect some tornado warnings could be coming out.
First thing that's important to notice is that it's headed toward West Liberty and Louisa.
Just before 6 p.m., an EF3 tornado touches ground in Menifee County, Kentucky, and sets out on an 86-mile path of destruction. In just 18 minutes, the tornado claims 2 lives in Menifee County before tearing into Morgan County.
Just outside the West Liberty area right now.
Shortly after, West Liberty is hit.
We saw the funnel forming right over top of the house.
Yeah, we saw it. I mean, the sirens never went off or nothing. I mean, it just happened.
We was out on the front porch and it took us 2 seconds before it hit.
We were standing outside the door and there was a big funnel cloud that was behind us, and we turned around and all we heard is they grabbed us, told us to get under the table, and when we turned around, before we know it, everything was gone.
There's still people missing, people trapped. It hit here, but it also hit a couple places out in the county too. So right now we don't know the full extent.
The tornado kills 7 people along its path in Morgan County, then passes into Lawrence County, where 2 more people are killed. The path of destruction ends in Wayne and Lincoln County, West Virginia. As we saw, destruction is similar in Magoffin and Johnson counties, both hit by a different EF3 tornado just an hour after West Liberty. Salyersville, demolished in its path.
We heard the tornado come through and it was incredibly violent.
I'm frankly almost at a loss for words. I didn't really expect to see that kind of catastrophic damage.
Tornadoes throughout Kentucky claimed 26 lives that day and injured over 200 people. In the morning light of March 3rd, the cleanup begins.
I thought it was going to take us with it. Yeah, I thought it was going to take the whole house.
When I came out, I walked into the backyard over there, and I looked, I just couldn't believe it.
I didn't know if there was a house standing when we got ready to come out or not.
It's hard, you know, to pick up the pieces, try to pick up the pieces and move on.
All I've got is the clothes I got on.
And your business?
It's gone.
I have never seen nothing like this in my life.
This property has been in my family for 50 years and all my life. And to see it all go in a matter of seconds is just indescribable.
Despite the devastation, a fighting spirit had already started to grow.
We will be back before you know it. It'll be strong too.
The buildings are wiped out. The town's not wiped out. Exactly, just the buildings.
Felt that God was with us that day and He brought us through.
This city and this county will live again.
We're thankful to the good Lord that we're all safe.
Because West Liberty needs help, and they don't need, 2 or 3 weeks from now, people don't need to forget about it.
Their spirit is just, it's like Hank Williams said, a country boy will survive. And we are going to survive.
You look back in history, people have endured horrible things and have always come through. And this is just one of those things that we just have to endure and trust God to see us through it and come out on the other side stronger people.
In tragedies like this, the physical destruction can be overwhelming at first. It takes months or even years to clear away.
But the thing about the emotional damage is it's not really plain to see, and it can really last much longer. We had the chance to visit West Liberty last month, and we wanted to hear from people there, including a woman by the name of Linda Oakley, who you just saw, talk about her personal efforts to put lives back together 10 years later.
Did you bring me a couple of blue hydrangea back when you come?
As hard as it might be to imagine, the West Liberty tornado was a sad case of been there, done that for Linda Oakley.
This is actually the second tornado that my husband and I experienced.
The first one was bad enough. The infamous Category 5 tornado that hit Xenia, Ohio 48 years ago, injuring 1,100 people and killing 42.
It's something that affects you still. Or him especially, because he'll remember he was on the sheriff's department, and right in the mix of right at the aftermath of trying to get people to the hospital.
Several years later, Linda and her husband moved to Kentucky, where they now own All Occasion Flowers in West Liberty, or as some call it, the new All Occasion Flowers, after the first one was blown down 10 years ago. Linda's calm perspective on the tornado may have been years in the making.
At the time, it looks so hopeless and devastating, but it's not the circumstance in most cases that takes people down, it's how they handle it.
So this is pretty amazing. You have Main Street on display right here in City Hall.
Yes, this is a display that was donated to us by the Morgan County Historical Society.
West Liberty Mayor Mark Walter has witnessed the build back here, brick by brick.
As we look across the street, we see the new bank.
He walks these streets and leads by example, as someone who fully understands recovery is not just new cement and drywall.
But the emotional aspect is always 10 years later, it's still there. It's still there. And to say, and just 10 years later, I get emotional. Because I've been here since I was 6 years old. And to see a church that was going to celebrate a 100-year celebration in 2 years, and to come into town and see the steeple on Route 7 and see the total destruction of your home church. That part is hard to get out of your mind.
We'll come together, the church is love.
But then the smile comes to your face when you go to church and you see the new replacement church that we built so close to looking like the old 100-year-old building.
Just as the physical recovery takes time, patience, planning, and hard work, the same can be said of the emotional recovery.
We have seen a lot of people that had some acute reactions to the tornado.
PTSD directly linked to the West Liberty tornado is very real, and a large part of what Chastity Eisen, the outpatient program director at Pathways, still helps with 10 years on.
It's not uncommon, like 20 to 40% of people will develop PTSD if they've been exposed to a natural disaster. And if they don't get treatment, they're not able to manage the coping skills and everything they need to overcome that on their own. A lot of PTSD symptoms may present like 4 to 6 years later.
Therapy that helped a lot of people, talking about what they saw, but at the same time, as you saw just a few minutes ago, the emotional aspect. It doesn't matter if it was yesterday or 10 years ago. If I go back to those days, it creeps up on you.
As anyone who's been smacked by tragedy can attest, just talking about it can help.
What I do is write, and I used to write articles for the paper, and I thought, what can I do to give people hope? And so I sat down and wrote an article to give people hope. And I know from comments from people that I got that it did give them some hope.
It really was such an honor to get to speak with those folks, and we also had a chance to speak with Mayor Walter a little more about the town's recovery, and we will hear from the mayor coming up at 7:30. And coming up after the break, a moment of pure terror. First responders racing in to rescue others, coming face to face with the tornado themselves. And 10 years later, they're remembering that fateful day when they put their lives on the line.
For members of the Floyd County Emergency Rescue Squad, being a first responder means jumping into action without a second thought, especially when people need your help the most.
You know, you think about it, they do this every day, but on March 2nd, 2012, members of this particular squad needed some emergency assistance themselves after they came face to face with an EF3 tornado in Salyersville.
And News Channel 3's Brandon Butcher is now riding along with that same crew 10 years later as they reflect back now on that day in the rearview mirror.
We were at the MAC here in Prestonsburg, was getting ready to show the movie The Very Worst Thing, which talks about the school bus accident back in 1958 when we got the call.
Morgan County is requesting mutual aid, possible courthouse collapse. Please respond.
We came back to the squad building
changed her clothes, got her gear, got in the truck, and just took off towards West Liberty. We know we've got destruction. Are we going to have trapped people that's perished? Are they going to be all over the road, all over the, you just don't know what you're going to be up against.
We were in contact with the Weather Service, and they said that we were actually clear from the tornadoes because they were following 64.
As the rescue squad crew traveled from Prestonsburg toward West Liberty, they had no idea they would run right into another just as powerful tornado in Salyersville.
We were going down the parkway. That exit is where we started getting pelted with hail. That's where we turned around.
We were just going to abandon the whole thing and come back to where we knew we could stay and be safe till the weather passed.
We came up to the red light there. I stopped because the telephone pole fell, and then that's when the transformer hit the side of the passenger side.
We took off flying. All we did was start spinning. You really couldn't feel the tires catching.
Put us about probably 100, 150 yards.
During the night of the tornado, we actually have footage from the Magoffin County Health Department right on that same causeway in Salyersville. And during that event, you can actually see the emergency management vehicle right in here as we zoom in as it comes by on its way to West Liberty to try to help out the folks there that have suffered from all that damage that they've seen. But as that truck pulls away, you can end up seeing in some tremendous detail the power of the tornado that is swirling the winds around as it immediately comes through, and eventually not only do you see the debris, but you actually see that same emergency vehicle come back in from the right as transformer gets blown right into the vehicle, and you can actually see at the very end of the frame there the flashing green and red lights from that emergency vehicle as it finally came to rest in front of that Magoffin County Health Department building.
And we were trying to find out about what was going on with them. And the call came in that there'd been an accident. I just jumped in the truck and took off in their direction. And I could see ahead of me the roadway blocked in several different ways, like vehicles and power poles and mainly the power lines and cables. And I went through and kind of weaved my way in until I found them.
2 broke ribs and a puncture wound and then glass embedded in my arm. Put off work at that time where I had the broke ribs for about 38 days.
Bad. I took about 6 or 8 months. I didn't do anything.
And yet the emergency was still real. The work still needed to be done.
And so we all kind of went back that night and regrouped, and the next morning we went to West Liberty. We were helping search for people and search buildings.
The tornado that hit Salyersville cut a path almost a mile wide with the parkway in the middle. Winds of 160 miles an hour caused $37 million in damage that took years to restore. Yet James, Tom, Richie, and Jennifer all still work as volunteers with the Preston County Rescue Squad, albeit with some lessons learned.
Show them to slow down.
Yeah.
Not get tunnel vision.
That's hard to face at times, but you and your team comes first, because if we get hurt, we can't help anybody else.
I mean, what we're looking at there is literally a survival story of people who went right through it.
Mm-hmm.
Unbelievable.
Unwittingly.
Wow. Yeah, unwittingly. Wow. Okay, so we are joined now by who you just heard from, meteorologist Brandon Butcher and meteorologist Tony Cavalier, to talk about the situation as it played out. Let's start in the morning, because you're coming in morning shift. What are you seeing on the maps? What do you see? Explain what you saw that maybe looked a little different.
I tell you, this was a day where days in advance, you just say things like, hey, that one looks like we might have some severe weather on our hands. But then all of a sudden you see that these colors, a lot of times you look at the colors and there might be just a yellow maybe kind of thing. But then all of a sudden, we're in this zone that we just have really never been in before in a long time anyway.
And I remember the angst I had in going from my morning run that day, because the colors that Brandon mentioned for a few days now, I'm translating that into my life, and then recognizing that I've got to go on the air and translate what could be a life-threatening situation to my viewers.
Yeah. And at what point, Tony, in the afternoon, did you start to really look at this and say, wow, this could be different than anything we've seen around?
As soon as we came on the air at 5 o'clock, we went right to wall-to-wall coverage, and the first tornado warning was issued. And Brandon, as I recall that night, there were many counties under simultaneous tornado warnings.
You're looking at this set of circumstances that could play out, and you owe it to the viewers, you owe it to people out there and to citizens to say what could happen. That's important.
And that's why once a year I like to do my demo where I get under the table.
I've seen
but
that,
I don't like to do it a day of a tornado watch. I like to do it well in advance. Maybe the tornado watch has occurred over in Kansas. And that way people, because if you do it same day, like I did that day for the first time in my career, now all of a sudden you are scaring people.
Okay. Talk about the difference of this storm. And because we've had tornadoes in our region, but this one was different in what way? Aside from the obvious, the damage, in what way was this one different than the others?
Time of year is the most important thing, because we're coming out of winter, and so you still have a winter atmosphere up in the heavens, and yet it's springtime down where we live, and you really don't get those conditions together once you get to late spring and summer.
For me, what ended up being key was when I was working in my last station in Springfield, Massachusetts. Remember, I'd only been here a short time. There was a tornado that happened on my last week of work in Springfield, Massachusetts. And it was also an EF3 tornado, and it went right through downtown, actually hit our building while I was broadcasting on the air. But when it came to the West Liberty tornado, it was almost like a whole light switch thing went off, because it developed almost the exact same signature that I saw in Springfield. And it gave me confidence that not only are we talking about a tornado, but one that was going to stay on the ground, and it was going to be something that we're going to talk about even a half hour later. You know?
There were no people killed in the town of West Liberty, despite that storm coming through. And I think, you know, not to pat you guys on the back and too much, but warning people ahead of time can literally save lives.
The experience I was calling upon was not the Springfield tornado, but having researched the Wheelersburg tornado of 1968, which was an F5. So having done the research, having talked to people at Dogwood Ridge, just above Wheelersburg, I was able to bring that expertise into the equation.
Well, you guys, appreciate your time talking about this. It's fascinating. We could talk for the entire show about it, but it's really something. And hopefully we'll never see anything like that again.
Coming up, I had the privilege to visit West Liberty back in February. It was a compelling trip that left a lasting impact on me. It's a story of perseverance of those who lived through it. I took a tour of the town that's still standing strong right now.
In times of tragedy, sometimes it takes a community coming together to get through it.
For the people of West Liberty, the community's strength was strong that day and still is a decade on. News Channel 3's Tony Cavalier caught up with people in town as they reminisce and move on with their recovery.
On our drive into town along Route 7, we found West Liberty all spruced up for the Valentine's weekend. The Methodist Church steeple, a sign of the comeback. Prestonsburg and Main Streets open for business and sparkling on this sunny day. Symbolically, the wind blew hard during our stay, an eerie reminder of that fateful night when buildings were torn into shreds and cars tossed around like Tonka toys. 6 lives were lost in Morgan County that night. Dave Payton recalls the night he stayed in his pharmacy.
As I said, the funeral home, that whole side of it was pretty much gone. We actually got a lot of their debris over behind the pharmacy. The building that was here was destroyed. Actually went inside and there was a 2x8 that had gone through 2 walls, the outside wall and 2 other interior walls. Don't even come close to describing what it was like. I mean, it just looked like a war zone. There was cars turned over, there was buildings destroyed.
A decade later, the scars remain like chunks of brick where lots remain empty. But progress is palpable, like the commercial bank building whose roof was decapitated. Soon my memories crystallized as I recalled the Sorghum Festival parade, which I visited after the tornado. The tented village then and every September since has been filled during the town's annual homecoming. From the visiting Elliott County ROTC, a special message that Saturday.
Tornado couldn't tear you down. Tornado couldn't tear you down. We just rebuilt your little town. We just rebuilt your little town.
Sorghum Festival's our big thing here.
Everybody loves it.
And everybody loves it. Everybody gets together.
From the still empty old Giovanni's lot on the parade route, Heather and BJ recounted the angst that frightful Friday night. And what do you guys do?
We all get the customers and we all go back to the stocker and we get underneath folding tables from Walmart. And
There was 3 young kids. We had 2 on oxygen.
A few blocks away at Mackenzie's Grill and Pool Hall, you'll find the best fish Sammies this side of Lexington. After all, owner Donnie has had a lot of practice. His memories are the stuff scrapbooks are made of.
John Brown picked me up and put me under the pool table.
So you use the pool table to shelter your head from the roof?
Yeah, it took the whole roof and everything off before the tornado, and this was after.
That's West Liberty 10 years into the rebuild after a night of tornado terror.
Okay, so it's easy to see how people could be obviously so down after a situation like that, and yet they immediately start thinking about the future and going forward, and life goes on. It's just something that you see after disasters like this.
So having visited West Liberty after the tornado for multiple years to go to the parade.
Oh yeah.
The Sorghum Festival parade, which draws a lot of people, as we've seen in my story. It's interesting to see how lots have filled in now. There's still big spots.
It's true, you got to see it.
The comeback is, you know what Mayfield's going to go on?
Time-lapse photography.
It's going to be a long time before Mayfield in Western Kentucky comes back, because it's been 10 years in the making in West Liberty.
Yeah, and it's interesting to hear the mayor's take on that. The mayor of West Liberty's take on that, on how, don't worry. It's almost like, they're preaching to people in the western part of Kentucky to say the devastation immediately afterwards, you just think there's no hope. Like there's just might as well just pack your bags and get out. But they start right away on trying to get things going.
Yeah, but keep in mind though that pre-tornado, West Liberty on Saturday was a bustling town. So what we are in the process of doing is getting West Liberty back to pre-tornado times, when folks are doing their business and commerce in town as opposed to traveling.
Did you notice some of the empty spaces that were there? And we're talking about buildings that were 100 or more years old that were just torn down so quickly. And these were really sturdy, thick block buildings that were just wiped out. When you look back on it, Tony, and you think about 10 years since, how does West Liberty compare to some of the other areas that you've seen? Not even in person, but when you look at towns like Xenia and places like that. How does West Liberty compare when it comes to build back?
Well, the build back is slow because it is rural America. I think Xenia and other towns we've seen in the heartland of America are a little bigger. But I still remember, Tim, coming in that day after, being met by the National Guardsman. Mr. Cavalier, you're going to have to take the long way around.
Okay.
The short way is for emergency vehicles.
Okay.
I'm with Ryan Bloomfield, my photographer. No sooner do we make the turn to go long way, coming out of West Liberty, there are coroner vans. Clark County, Jessamine County. They're in Lexington. We get around behind, and in the trees there are strewn clothes. These are clothes from homes in Menifee County where the storm formed. And they were thrust all the way. That's how devastating this tornado was.
Yeah, physically, that's for sure. All right, hey, thanks, Tony. Coming up during our visit to West Liberty, we were able to catch up with Mayor Mark Walter to talk about how far the town has come.
The town of West Liberty has come a long way out of the rubble left behind on March 2nd, 2012. While not every building has been replaced, the tornado wasn't able to destroy the sense of community there. So leading the community is a man by the name of Mark Walter. He is the mayor. He worked for the fire department at the time, and he's been mayor now for 8.5 years. He has some words of wisdom and perspective for people in Western Kentucky, too, who are dealing with destruction from their own recent tornado. Here's our discussion with him. 8.5 years of challenge, and yet at the same time, 8.5 years of tremendous growth for a city that went through the unimaginable. How much of a challenge does it continue to be?
Well, we still have a challenge of economic growth. As we will see in your segments, that there's a lot of empty spaces on Main Street. We have been blessed to have businesses rebuild. We've had new business come into town, but at the same time, some of the businesses that we lost did not rebuild and did not return.
When you look back on the days after the devastation, after that tornado rolled through, and you remember walking around town, did you think that the city would be in the shape it's in right now? Not everything's back, but it's certainly, obviously, a completely different place than it was back then.
Well, at the time, you started the discussion on at the time. We were in utter shock. And to visualize where we are today, no. There was no way to visualize what would be replaced and what would be in these empty lots, or even the lots where the destruction was. We had not only businesses, we had so many residentials that were destroyed, churches totally lost. The United Methodist Church, that is my church, the West Liberty Christian Church, that was totally destroyed. We had, and to see them today, they're rebuilt and they're thriving, and that we could not see that the day after the destruction.
How proud does it make you feel to be where you are today and to be mayor of this community?
Well, the idea of where we are today, I'm so proud when people come in and say, wow, you all look like you have rebuilt. It takes time. And the message that we send to Western Kentucky, don't get disheartened because it didn't happen yesterday. It took time, but it was always that hope, and we hope that that message is spread to western part of the state, and we've heard that out of western part of the state. But that word hope was always the top of our mind, and always reiterated that the hope is there, and 10 years later we can see that.
You know, it was just so easy to see that this is somebody who refuses to give up, and he admits it was difficult then. It's still difficult now. So he's not trying to sugarcoat anything, but at the same time, he's showing, I think, what leadership's all about.
Just a resilient community there. They're not where they want to be. They're not where they were, but they're not going to give up.
Good way to put it.
Well, coming up, Kentucky, not the only state impacted by the storms. For communities in West Virginia, that impact can still be seen and felt.
The tornado that hit West Liberty may have been weakened by the time it hit Wayne and Lincoln counties in West Virginia, but the damage can still be seen and felt to this day.
That's where I went 10 years ago, and then again over the course of the past month. But some of those scars remain on the land and also emotionally for the people there still to this day. Bill Likens is the executive director of outreach for the Dunlow Community Center, which is part of a program through First Presbyterian Church in Huntington.
Lived here most of my life, and no one ever thought a tornado would come through and do any damage here. It's so unusual. You know, the hills will protect us. Heard it for years and years.
Walking back in time 10 years ago isn't an easy task, but Bill sees firsthand how the tornado and its consequences continue to shape the Dunbar community.
And it kind of opened our eyes up and showed us, to be a little bit more vigilant.
This church is where many people sought shelter on March 2nd, 2012. And in the following weeks, it's where many found basics like food and water.
We had 800 hot meals a day out of a residential stove using generators. Was just ridiculous. So we started thinking.
And from that thinking and fundraising came the 10,000 square foot Dunlow Community Center. During the COVID-19 pandemic, Bill says the facility has distributed around 6 million pounds of food. But that's not all. The facility is also prepared in case what happened in 2012 might happen once again.
It is also a disaster relief center. So it has 8 showers in it, a full natural gas generator to run the building when the power's out, and a full commercial kitchen.
While good things have come from the storm, the damage is still visible on the hills.
Came over the hills this way. It wiped kind of this whole hill here. It knocked all the trees, broke them over. You can still see them. And then it went up this holler on its way to East Lynn and Kysville area.
Loretta Browning still lives over those hills where the tornado went next into Kysville.
We really didn't think it would happen here. So it kind of took us by surprise.
I spoke to Loretta 10 years ago on April 2nd, 2012, 1 month after the tornado went through.
I was at the wake, and My daughter was home and she had called me, which, you know, we had seen the warnings on TV, but we didn't take, seriously, we didn't take serious that a tornado would actually come through our community.
It's a story
we never forget this date. We don't forget this date.
she still remembers vividly to this day.
And I thought, oh God, you know, is my house on the ground? Is my kids okay? And I get here and I see all the destruction. It was pretty rough. Everybody was coming from the funeral, and they were all dressed up in their suits and dresses, and they're having to climb trees to get, you know, on further up the road where most of them lived.
At the time, Loretta worked at the Kaysville post office, which has since closed in 2016. She remembers scars from the tornado's destructive path left strewn across the parking lot.
There was a lot of debris blown in here from Kentucky. I found a funeral home receipt for a funeral home in Kentucky, and I put it in an envelope and mailed it back to them.
While the blue tarps and twisted metal are gone, Loretta says scars from the tornado still remain in the hearts and minds of people who live there.
I don't think the fear has left anybody. Every year you get a little nervous. You know, is this going to happen again?
And the Dunlow Community Center is still a resource in times of need for that community since the tornado came through in 2012. It was most recently used in the 2021 February ice storms.
When we come back, I'm breaking down the 2012 outbreak by way of radar, showing some similarities to a deadly storm that struck Kentucky this past year.
We see meteorologists all the time using basic radar for things like seeing if maybe rain or snow is falling over a particular area.
Radar also a key tool in tracking the development and life cycle of tornadoes. Meteorologist Andy Chillian is here now to explain more by comparing the radars for the 2012 tornadoes to a much more recent storm we saw, the Mayfield, Kentucky tornado this past December. Andy?
Yes, radar technology honestly has come a long way in the past 10 years, but you'll still find that storms looked the same on radar a decade ago as they do today. So what I'm going to explain here is compare those two storms that you just mentioned, those from 2012 and just last year, and talk about what meteorologists look at to determine whether a tornadic storm is occurring. So let's start by taking a look at the radar presentation on the evening of March 2nd, 2012, and this is specifically the storm that produced the West Liberty tornado. So I just want you to look at how the radar does look. There's West Liberty. Now we're going to take you to Salyersville, so this is just after 7 o'clock local time, also on the evening of March 2nd, and this is the storm in question. Do you see how it looks the same? The appearance is relatively the same. So let's take you back now to the West Liberty storm and talk about what you are seeing here. Well, this storm, its signature on radar, it has a particular name. This is called a hook echo. So this is a hook echo storm that you are currently seeing on radar, and it's appropriately named because you can see the hook shape here that is forming. And how does the hook form? Well, you've got very strong winds wrapping precipitation counterclockwise around a part of the storm which doesn't have any precipitation, and that's where air is rising very rapidly upward. That's called the updraft, which is key in the development of a tornado. So that is the hook echo storm. And we look at these types of storms that can produce tornadoes. Now, you can get tornadoes from storms that don't necessarily look like this, but when you see a storm like this, oftentimes it will be producing a tornado, and oftentimes as well, frequently, it's going to be a more significant, a destructive tornado. And so I've talked about the tornadoes. Where is the tornado on this type of storm? Well, it's right on the edge of the hook here. That is where the tornado is going to be located. And so in this instance, it made a direct pass through the West Liberty area as an EF3 destructive tornado. So that's what the radar looked like on March 2nd. Now let's fast forward almost a year to December 10th of 2021. This was the Mayfield, Kentucky storm, so western Kentucky, but you may see how it looks somewhat similar. Here's that hook shape yet again. Here's the tornado about to make a direct pass through the Mayfield area. Now, let's take you this radar scan just after it made a direct hit on Mayfield. Now, I want you to focus on what this looks like here. Do you see how you see really bright colors there? So you see pinks and whites. Those are almost off the chart when we talk about the radar colors. So remember how I said radar technology has advanced? Well, that is something that we're looking at. The radar sends a beam out and it can detect the size of objects. So it can detect raindrops or hail, but in this case, it's more than that. We're talking about bigger objects, things like tree limbs, trees, parts of buildings, in essence, debris. Well, that's what this is. New radar technology is able to detect what's called a debris ball. And when you see something like this on radar, well, that means that there is a destructive tornado that is moving through. So this is something that meteorologists look at and can issue warnings if necessary as to keep you safe as a destructive tornado may be moving through. So hopefully that explains to you what we've seen and how we're comparing storms 10 years ago to now, some of the similarities and differences to help meteorologists keep you safe.
Hey, thank you, Andy. Well, coming up, a devastating scene in southern Ohio 10 years removed. Andrew Colegrove is back in Otway to take a look at their recovery efforts.
The village of Otway was among the communities hit hard by the tornado outbreak as it moved into Scioto County.
The city landscape and the lives of those who call it home changed forever. But the people of Otway were determined to build back even better than before. Andrew Colegrove was on the ground that night, and as he reports, the village's determination has paid off.
Most everybody in Otway and Scioto County remembers what they were doing the evening of March 2nd, 2012.
It happened so fast.
Janie Perty was working at the Otway Depot gas station and convenience store.
In the windows, you could feel them shake.
As it became clear the weather was about to take a drastic and potentially dangerous turn, her boss called and recommended employees take shelter in the fire department nearby.
The owner had called us and told us, to run to the firehouse if we needed to, which is a good thing we didn't.
Not following that advice turned out to be possibly life-saving.
Glad you didn't do that, huh?
Right.
The sky was like a greenish black.
You couldn't even see in front of your face out the window.
And I'm glad nobody got hurt and the damage can be repaired.
A tornado touched down here, not causing near the level of devastation as West Liberty or Salyersville the same night, but their fire station was destroyed. Parts of the building spilled out onto the street.
We were very lucky because if it had just came over just a little bit, it would have wiped us out.
You guys see a lot of bad stuff throughout the years. How much does that one night stick out in your mind?
Well, it sticks out because it affected us.
Current Chief Shad Ruby was the assistant chief back then.
What was your immediate reaction when you first got there and saw how bad the damage was?
Well, a little surprised.
Used to being there for others during emergencies, the village's firefighters found themselves in need of help.
We had to continue on with business.
Neighboring stations helped with calls as the Otway department worked to rebuild.
We had equipment donated. We had trucks from as far as north of Dayton donated.
Acquiring funding took longer than they would have liked. A new Otway Fire Department was built and opened in 2018, 6 years after the tornado hit.
A neighbor whose son was a member of the Otway Fire Department donated this land for the new building to be constructed on.
We've had a lot of support from our residents, fundraisers every year.
Chief Ruby remembers seeing images in the days that followed of other towns that night where tornadoes left even more of a mark.
We always knew that it could have been a lot worse.
Where the former station sat, now a vacant lot, save for a small section now used for storage. The new station also contains new high-tech equipment courtesy of a FEMA grant.
We tripped 10 years ago, but we were able to get back up again and keep marching forward.
The village's firefighters grateful after a brief, impactful moment that took years to recover from, to be back in full operation.
The Brush Creek Board Trustees also holds its meetings in the new Otway Fire Station.
When you hear of a tornado striking, you probably heard it referred to as an EF1 or an EF3, that number letter sequence, and you may be wondering, what's the difference? Well, meteorologist Drew Narsudis joins us in the studio to break down each classification and what you can expect if each type of tornado is headed towards your community, Drew.
Yeah, now the unfortunate news is we can't tell you immediately that an EF1 tornado is coming your way. We usually find out about it a couple days later when the National Weather Service does its little watching, looking for signs of what exactly happened here. And well, the good thing is that you all know that any level of tornado is a tornado you want to avoid. So let's talk about those levels. EF0, our starting tornado. This is what majority of the tornadoes we get here in our region are. That's 65 to about 85 mile/hour winds. Ooh, that's enough to maybe cause some damage to homes, maybe rip a couple of tree branches or limbs off. However, overall, this usually doesn't cause too much destruction. EF1s, this is when things really start to pick up a little, 86 to 110 miles per hour. This is enough to topple a few cars, maybe not completely lift them off the ground. However, it certainly is a very dangerous storm. We're getting a little scarier as we move towards an EF2. This is 111 to 135 miles per hour. This can take, entire trees up into the funnel and rip them straight from the roots in the ground. As we take a look at an EF3, we're getting even more wild, 135 to 165 roughly speaking. This is enough to, pick up entire pickups and toss them about the yard like they were a child's toy. I'm going to get off the screen for this. This is getting a little frightening around EF4. This is 166 to about 200 miles per hour. This is enough to unfortunately level entire homes as it passes on through. And then EF5s. Luckily, this isn't anything like what we get here in our region. This is Tornado Valley levels of tornadoes, and this is when you get over 200 miles per hour, and this is enough to bring even some cars, you missed that, like missiles through the air in our region. Again, the Salyersville and the West Liberty one was an EF3. We usually get something much lower than that. However, they're all possibly deadly, so be careful, you guys, if one is coming your way.
Thank you, Drew. Well, coming up, if you got caught in a tornado outbreak, what would you do? Tony breaks down some tips that will help keep your family safe.
For the past hour now, we have been telling you about the sudden devastation a tornado can bring, but what do you really do in that situation?
Well, Tony is always cooking up creative ways to pass along information, and he's prepared a special demonstration to help you remember some important do's and don'ts.
All sorts of do's and don'ts during storm watches and warnings. And keep in mind, during a watch, oftentimes the sun's going to be out. So you're going to go about your normal activities, keeping in mind that new alerts on our WSAZ app will be coming through as they're issued. Storm watch, kids play close by outside. Storm warning, kids inside. And by the way, once a storm warning is issued, you want to stay off corded phones. You want to stay off electronics that tie into, for example, headphones that tie into electronics. Now you hear the roar of a train. That could mean a big storm, a big tornado is about to strike. Under those most unusual circumstances, glass could shatter in the teeth of those winds. So you want to get away from windows and you want to seek an interior room. The idea is to put as many walls, as many floors between you and the outside. And keep in mind, as we saw in West Liberty, 2x4s in the big tornado were thrust through the air like projectiles and went through walls. There's an adage in meteorology, the bigger the hailstone, the better chance of a tornado. Golf ball, tennis ball. In the 1968 Wheelersburg tornado, the storm was preceded by softball-sized hailstones. Most mobile homes cannot survive a big tornado. Mobile homes will be lifted in the face of a big tornado and thrust in the air. It is probably prudent, very inconvenient, but probably prudent every time a tornado watch is issued to abandon the house until the threat of tornadoes and high winds has passed.
Thanks for joining us today as we look back at the devastation and a decade of recovery.
And we're going to end the show with 10 seconds of silence to honor those who lost their lives back on March 2nd, 2012.